The ship had been dead for a very long time. Captain L stood at the observation window of his salvage vessel and watched the ancient wreck turn slowly in the purple light of the Helix Nebula. It was massive, far larger than anything his people had built in the early days of their space travel. The hull was dark and covered in dust that had gathered over thousands of years. Strange symbols ran along its side, letters in a language that no living being could read. "How old?" El asked his science officer. The young checked his instruments 3 times before answering. His gray skin had gone pale. 12,000 years, Captain, perhaps older. El felt his throat tighten. 12,000 years. His own civilization, the Great Dominion, had only achieved space flight 8,000 years ago. They were taught from birth that they were the first. The path of the first voice, their holy religion, was built on this truth. They were chosen. They were the eldest children of the stars. But this ship was older. "We board it," El said. "Full team. Tell no one outside this crew what we have found." The boarding was difficult. The old ship had no power and its airlocks were frozen shut. They had to cut their way inside with plasma torches, and even then the metal fought them. It was strong, stronger than it should have been for something so ancient. Inside, the darkness was complete. Their lights cut through dust that floated in the zero gravity like snow. The walls were lined with pipes and cables, all dead, all silent. But there was something else too. Writing. Everywhere they looked, there were words printed on the walls, on signs, on doors. None of them could read it. They found the first body in what looked like a control room. It was small, smaller than with only 2 arms and 2 legs. Its skin had dried and pulled tight against its bones over the long years. It wore a uniform of some kind, with a patch on the shoulder showing a blue and green sphere. "What is it?" one of the soldiers whispered. "Unknown species," the science officer said, but his voice was shaking. "I will need to study it further." They found more bodies as they moved deeper into the ship, dozens of them, then hundreds. They were everywhere, in rooms and corridors, at their stations and in their beds. Whatever had killed them had done so quickly. They had not suffered. They had simply stopped. Then they found the chamber. It was at the heart of the ship, behind doors that were thicker than any others. When they finally cut through, their lights revealed something that made El's blood run cold. Rows and rows of glass pods stretched out into the darkness. Thousands of them. And inside each pod, one of the strange small beings floated in pale blue liquid. "They are alive," the science officer breathed. "Captain, they are still alive. These pods are still functioning. Emergency power, 12,000 years on emergency power." El walked between the rows slowly. He looked at the sleeping faces. They were different from each other in small ways. Some had dark skin, some had light. Their hair was different colors, but they were all the same species as the dried bodies in the corridors. These ones had survived. At the end of the chamber, separated from all the others, there was one pod that was different. It was larger, wrapped in extra layers of protection, connected to machines that the others did not have. The being inside was female, El thought, though he could not be sure. Her skin was dark brown and her head was shaved. Strange marks covered her body, lines and symbols that had been cut into her skin on purpose. Tattoos, perhaps, or something more. The science officer approached the pod and began to read the symbols on its surface. Then he stopped. He turned to El with fear in his eyes. "Captain, I need you to see this." El looked at where the officer was pointing. There was a small screen on the pod, still glowing after all these years. Numbers and words scrolled across it in the alien language, but below the screen, someone had carved symbols directly into the metal. Old symbols, symbols that El recognized. They were from the Forbidden Codex. The Forbidden Codex was the holiest text of the religion. It was written in a language that no one could understand, a language that was said to be the original tongue of the universe itself. The first voice had spoken in this language at the beginning of time. Only the highest priests were allowed to look upon its pages, and even they could not read it. It was holy because it was unknowable. And here were its symbols, carved into the metal of an alien ship that was older than civilization. "This is impossible," El whispered. He looked more closely at the carvings. They formed words, he realized, a message, and below the message, in simple numbers that even he could understand, was a count. The number was 7,412. And above the number, more words that he could not read. "We take this one," El said, pointing to the special pod. "Only this one, and we speak of this to no one except High Priest himself." His crew obeyed, though they did not understand. They carefully disconnected the pod from its machines and carried it back to their ship. The woman inside never woke. Her eyes never opened, but her lips moved, slowly and constantly, as if she was speaking to someone in her dreams, as if she was reciting something over and over again. El watched her through the glass as they flew back toward Prime. He thought about the forbidden codex, about the words that no one could read, about the faith that his entire civilization was built upon. And he thought about the words carved into her pod. He did not know what they meant, but he had seen enough of the alien writing now to recognize patterns. The large words at the top seemed to be a title or a label of some kind, and the number below, 7,412, seemed to be a count, a version number perhaps, as if whatever this woman was, she was the 7,412th attempt at something. The words above the number, he would later learn, meant linguistic archive. But El did not know that yet. He only knew that the foundations of everything he believed had just cracked, and that the woman sleeping in the pod was somehow the key to it all. High Priest would want to see this immediately. And when he did, nothing would ever be the same. High Priest was old. He had served the path of the first voice for more than 200 years. He had read every text, performed every ritual, and spoken every prayer that his religion demanded. He had stood before millions and told them the truth of their existence. They were the first. They were chosen. The first voice had spoken to them before all others. He had believed this with all his heart. Now he stood in a sealed medical chamber beneath the holy citadel, looking at a woman who should not exist. She floated in a special tank that the doctors had built to keep her alive. Her eyes were closed. Her body was covered in strange marks, and her lips never stopped moving. "What is she saying?" asked. The lead doctor, a nervous young female named shook her head. "We do not know, Your Holiness. Our translation machines cannot recognize the language, any of the languages." "Any of them?" "She speaks in many tongues, Your Holiness. We have counted at least 40 different patterns, perhaps more, all unknown to us." Moved closer to the tank. The woman's face was peaceful, almost like a child sleeping. But there was something else there too, something that made him afraid. It was the way her lips moved with such purpose, such rhythm. She was not just mumbling. She was reciting, preserving, keeping something alive through the sheer act of speaking it. "Leave us," said. The doctors obeyed. When they were gone, did something he had never done before. He took the forbidden codex from his robes. It was a small book, very old, bound in leather that had turned black with age. Its pages were thin and fragile, and its words were impossible to read. He opened it to the first page and began to read aloud. The words felt strange in his mouth. He did not know what they meant. No one did. But he had memorized their sounds long ago, as all high priests must. He spoke them now, slowly and carefully, hopping for something. He did not know what. He read for hours. The woman did not respond. Her lips kept moving, speaking her own silent words. Grew tired. His voice grew rough, but he continued. Night fell outside the citadel. Still he read. On the 7th night, he reached a passage near the end of the codex. It was considered the most sacred of all, a prayer to the first voice itself. He spoke the words with as much reverence as he could manage. And the woman's eyes opened. Stopped speaking. His heart began to pound. The woman in the tank was looking directly at him. Her eyes were dark brown, deep and intelligent. There was no confusion in them, no fear, only a strange, sad clarity. Then she spoke. Her voice was clear despite the liquid around her. The machines must have been carrying her words somehow, and the language she spoke was the language of the forbidden codex, the holy tongue, the unknowable speech of the first voice. But she spoke it the way a mother speaks to a child, casually, easily, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "You are pronouncing it wrong," she said. Dropped his staff. It fell to the marble floor with a crash that echoed through the chamber. He could not move. He could not breathe. His mind had simply stopped working. The woman raised her hand and touched the glass of the tank. The doctors had said she was weak, that she might never wake, but her movements were strong and sure. "The emphasis goes on the second syllable," she said, "and you are swallowing the consonants. It changes the meaning completely. You were not asking for blessing. You were asking for soup." She smiled. It was a small smile, tired and sad but real. "Do not feel bad," she added. "It is a common mistake. The early Indo-European speakers had the same problem." Found his voice, it came out as a whisper. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head. I am a linguistic archaeologist, or I was 12,000 years ago. I assume some time has passed." 12,000 years, managed to say. Closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was pain there. Deep pain, held carefully under control. "Then I am the last one," she said quietly. "The others did not survive. The ship failed, but the archive worked. I am still here." The archive looked at him with something like pity. "Your holy book," she said. "The language you call sacred and unknowable. It is called Proto-Indo-European. It is a reconstructed human language, an ancestor tongue that was spoken on Earth perhaps 6,000 years before I was born. We rebuilt it from fragments and patterns. It is one of 847 languages stored in my mind." Felt the floor tilt beneath him. "That is impossible." "No," said. "It is science. I volunteered for the Linguistic Archive Project when I was 23 years old. Humanity was leaving Earth, spreading out among the stars. We knew we might not survive. We knew our colonies might fail. And we knew that if we died, our languages would die with us." She pressed her palm flat against the glass. "Every human language carries the soul of a people," she said. "Their stories, their songs, their jokes, their prayers, their ways of seeing the world. When a language dies, a universe dies with it. We could not let that happen, so we created the archives. People like me, whose minds were modified to hold entire language families. We were meant to sleep until humanity was safe, then wake and teach what we knew." His legs finally gave out. He sat down heavily on the cold floor. "But you said Proto-Indo-European was reconstructed," he said. "It was dead even in your time." "Yes, dead for thousands of years, but we brought it back. We brought them all back. Every language we could find, living or dead, we preserved, because they mattered, because words matter." Looked at the forbidden codex in his hands, the book that generations have had, the words of the first voice that no one could understand. "How do you have this?" he asked. "How do your words appear in our most sacred text?" Was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was gentle. "I do not know," she said, "but I can guess. Your people found something a long time ago, a human ship perhaps, or human remains. You took what you found and built a religion around the parts you could not understand." She looked at him with compassion. "You did not know," she said. "You could not have known, but the first voice you worship, the sacred words you speak without understanding, they are human. They were always human." Sat in silence. Above him, the woman who carried the words of his gods waited patiently. She had waited 12,000 years already. She could wait a little longer. Finally, he looked up at her. "What happens now?" he asked. Smiled that sad smile again. "Now," she said, "you have a choice. You can kill me, hide the truth, and let your religion continue as it always has. Or you can let me speak. Let me teach. Let me show your people that the words they worship are not unknowable. They are a gift from a species that loved language so much, they gave everything to preserve it. She closed her eyes. But choose soon, please. Others will find out, and not everyone will want the truth to be known. Above them, alarms began to sound. The Dominion's leadership had discovered what was hidden beneath the citadel, and they were coming. They came for her in the morning. Soldiers in black armor filled the medical chamber, their weapons raised, their faces hidden behind masks. Behind them came the Council of Voices, the 5 most powerful leaders of the Dominion. They wore robes of pure white and moved with the slow certainty of those who had never been questioned. Stood between them and the woman's tank. "Move aside, High Priest," said the eldest of the council. His name was, and he had ruled the Dominion for longer than most could remember. "This creature is a threat to everything we have built." "She is not a creature," said. "She is a person. Her name is, and she speaks the language of the Forbidden Codex." The council members looked at each other, stepped forward. "Then she must die," he said simply, "and all evidence of her must be destroyed. The path of the first voice cannot be questioned. It is the foundation of our civilization. Without it, there is only chaos. Without it, there is truth." Everyone turned, had woken again. She floated in her tank, her dark eyes watching the council with calm interest. "You are afraid," she said. "I understand. You have built everything on a lie, and now you see that lie for what it is. It is terrifying, but the lie was not your fault. You did not know." Silence Creature hissed. "Your language," continued, ignoring him, "has 17 words borrowed from Proto-Indo-European. Your word for star comes from a word that meant to scatter. Your word for home comes from a word that meant to lie down. You inherited these words from contact with humans thousands of years ago. They became part of you. They shaped how you see the universe." His gray skin had turned almost white. "Lies, all lies." "I can prove it," pressed her hand against the glass. "Give me 1 hour. Let me speak. Let me show you where your words came from. If I am wrong, you can kill me. But if I am right, you will know. You will finally understand." The council argued among themselves, watched his face and saw something he had never seen there before: fear, real fear. The old ruler understood what was at stake. If this woman was telling the truth, everything he had built would crumble. 1 hour, finally said. "But you will speak only to us in this room. No recordings, no witnesses. And if we decide you are lying, you will die before the sun sets." Nodded, "That is fair." They drained the tank and gave her clothes to wear. She was thin and weak, her muscles damaged from 12,000 years of sleep. But her voice was strong, and when she began to speak, the room went silent. She told them her story. She was born on Earth, in a place called Nigeria, in a city called Lagos. She had loved languages since she was a child, learning her grandmother's tongue when everyone else had forgotten it. She studied at great universities and learned how languages were born, how they lived, and how they died. And she learned that languages were dying faster than ever before. In her time, one language disappeared every 2 weeks. Thousands of years of human history erased in a single generation. Songs that would never be sung again. Stories that would never be told. Ways of thinking that would vanish from the universe forever. She could not accept this. When the colony ships were being built, when humanity prepared to leave Earth for the stars, she volunteered for the archive project. Scientists had developed a way to store entire languages in the human mind, not just vocabulary and grammar, but everything. Pronunciation, poetry, jokes, songs, the rhythm and music of each tongue. It was painful, said. The process took 3 years. They had to rebuild parts of my brain. I spent months in a coma while the languages settled into place. When I woke, I could speak in tongues that had been dead for 10,000 years. I could sing lullabies in languages that no one had spoken since before your species existed. She looked at the council. There were others like me, 53 archives in total, each carrying different language families. We were meant to spread out among the colony ships to ensure that if some ships failed, others would survive. I was assigned to the Prometheus Rising. Her voice grew quiet. We never arrived. Something went wrong with the navigation systems. The ship drifted off course. By the time the crew realized what had happened, it was too late. They put themselves into stasis, hoping someone would find them, but no one came. The power failed one section at a time. The stasis pods shut down. Everyone died. She closed her eyes. Except me. My pod was different, special, built to last longer than the others because I was not just a passenger. I was a library. I was the voice of 600 dead cultures. They could not let me die. She opened her eyes and looked at. And here I am, 12,000 years later, the last archive, the last voice. Was gripping his staff so tightly that his knuckles had turned dark. This proves nothing. You are telling stories, lies to confuse us. Then let me show you, stood up slowly, her legs shaking. Your forbidden codex. The words you believe were spoken by the first voice at the beginning of time. I know them, all of them, and I know what they mean. She held out her hand. Hesitated only a moment, then he gave her the codex. Opened the book carefully, respectfully. She turned to the first page and began to read. But she did not read the way the priests read, stumbling over sounds they did not understand. She read the way a mother reads to a child, naturally, easily, with love. And as she read, she translated. The first passage was not a holy text. It was a letter, a man writing to his wife telling her about his journey across a great sea. He missed her. He missed their children. He hoped to see them again soon. The second passage was a song, a simple song about rain falling on fields of wheat and the joy of harvest after a long summer. The third passage was a joke, actually laughed as she read it, a surprised sound that echoed off the walls. It was a very old joke, she explained, about a farmer and a stubborn donkey. Humans had been telling it for thousands of years. By the time she finished, the council members were sitting down. Their faces were blank with shock, looked like a man watching his house burn. This is what you worship, said gently. Not the voice of creation, just people. People who lived and loved and laughed and died thousands of years before you existed. People whose words you found and kept, even though you could not understand them. She closed the book. There is nothing shameful in this. You saw something beautiful and you preserved it. That is worthy of respect. But now you know the truth. The question is, what will you do with it? Stood up slowly. His face had changed. The fear was gone. In its place was something harder, something more dangerous. We will do what we must, he said. The truth does not matter. Only stability matters. Only order. If the people learn that their faith is built on human garbage, there will be chaos, wars. The Dominion will fall. He raised his hand, and the soldiers stepped forward. Kill her, kill the high priest as well. He has seen too much. Destroy all evidence, and we will never speak of this again. Looked at, she smiled at him, that same sad smile. It was good to speak to someone, she said, after so long, even if only for an hour. The soldiers raised their weapons. And then the lights went out. The darkness lasted only a few seconds. But when the lights returned, the soldiers were on the ground and the council members were surrounded by figures in gray robes. Young priests, dozens of them. They had come from every corner of the citadel armed with whatever they could find. Their faces were determined. Their hands were shaking, but they did not back down. One of them stepped forward. She was barely old enough to have finished her training, with bright eyes and a scar across her cheek. We have heard everything, she said. The woman's words were carried through the citadel's speaking system. Every priest, every servant, every guard heard what she said. The truth is already spreading. His face twisted with rage. Traitors, all of you, you will be executed for this. Perhaps, the young priest said, but the truth will still be known. You cannot kill everyone who has heard it. Stepped forward, he had not expected this. He had expected to die. But now, looking at these young faces, he felt something he had not felt in many years: hope. We must go, he said, all of us. They will send soldiers, real soldiers, not Citadel guards. We need to leave before they arrive. The young priests moved quickly. They had prepared for this, realized. They had been waiting for something to believe in, something worth fighting for. Was carried by two of the strongest among them, her body still too weak to walk far. They fled through secret passages that only the priests knew. Behind them, they could hear alarms beginning to sound. The Dominion was waking up to the fact that its foundations were cracking. They reached a small ship at the edge of the Citadel's landing area. It was nothing special, just a transport vessel used to carry supplies. But it could fly and it could reach space. That was enough. As they lifted off, asked to be brought to the communication systems, tried to stop her. You need rest, he said. You have been through too much. I have been resting for 12,000 years, said. I am tired of rest. I want to speak. That is what I was made to do. They helped her to the console. She activated the broadcast systems and began to speak. She did not speak in the language of the. She spoke in the holy tongue, the language of the forbidden codex. But she did not speak prayers or prophecies. She spoke stories. She told a tale about a clever spider who tricked a mighty king. It was a story from a place called Ghana, she said, told for thousands of years by people who were now long dead. Their language was gone. Their cities were dust. But their stories survived inside her head, waiting to be told again. She sang a song about lost love, in a language that had been spoken on islands in a great ocean. The words rose and fell like waves against a shore. She explained what each word meant, how the sounds carried emotion that could not be translated, only felt. She recited a poem written by a woman whose name had been forgotten, in a tongue that had died 300 years before was born. It was about watching the stars at night and wondering if someone, somewhere, was watching the same stars and feeling the same wonder. Across space, people stopped what they were doing. They listened to this strange voice speaking in their holiest language, but saying things that were not holy at all. They heard laughter where there should have been solemnity. They heard sadness where there should have been glory. They heard something impossibly old and impossibly alive. The Dominion tried to stop the broadcast. They sent signals to jam it, orders to shut down the receiving stations. But the young priests had been clever. They had routed the transmission through 100 different systems, bouncing it off satellites and relay stations across dozens of worlds. It could not be stopped. Spoke for hours. She told jokes that had made humans laugh before they had learned to walk upright. She sang lullabies that mothers had sung to their children in the dark times before fire was discovered. She recited battle chants from warriors who had faced death with nothing but courage and wooden spears. And slowly, the Dominion began to shake. On the planet Hex, crowds gathered in the streets. They were not angry, not yet. They were confused. They had been told all their lives that the holy language was unknowable, that it contained truths too great for mortal minds. But now they could hear it speaking of donkeys and rain and lost love. They could hear it being human. On the station above, priests abandoned their posts. They had spent their lives reciting words they did not understand. Now they knew what those words meant, and they could not pretend otherwise. On the itself, ordered the military to find the escaped ship and destroy it. But many of the officers hesitated. They had families. They had heard the broadcasts too. They did not know what to believe anymore. As they flew through the darkness between stars, asked if she was afraid. She paused her speaking to look at him. Her face was tired, more tired than he had ever seen anyone look, but her eyes were still bright. I carry the last words of 600 dead cultures, she said. Poets who are forgotten, priests whose gods no one remembers, mothers who sang lullabies to children who died thousands of years ago. They trusted me to keep them alive. They trusted me to speak when they could not. She smiled, but there was no happiness in it, only determination. I am not afraid of your armies, she said. I am not afraid of death. I am afraid of silence. I am afraid of letting them down, of letting all those voices finally go quiet after they fought so hard to survive. She turned back to the console. So I will keep speaking. I will keep singing. I will keep telling their stories until I have no breath left. That is the only thing that matters now. She resumed her broadcast. A children's counting rhyme this time. A simple song about numbers and animals that human children had sung while playing games in the dirt. His voice was gentle as she spoke it, the way one speaks to children, the way the original singers must have spoken it all those thousands of years ago. Somewhere across the galaxy, a child heard it and began to repeat the sounds. They did not understand the words, but they felt the rhythm, the joy, the playfulness that had been woven into the song by generations of human hands. The language, dead for, began to live again. And behind them, growing closer, the Dominion's warships began to gather, had given the order. The heretic must be silenced, whatever the cost. Then the sensors began to scream. Something was emerging from deep space. Many somethings. The young priest at the console turned pale. Ships, she said. Thousands of ships. They are coming from beyond the outer rim. Leaned forward, staring at the display. The ships were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were sleek and powerful, built for both speed and war, and they were broadcasting a signal on every frequency. A signal in the language that had been speaking. Stopped her broadcast. She listened to the incoming signal, and tears began to run down her face. They survived, she whispered. Humanity survived. They heard me. They found me. She looked at with something like wonder in her eyes. I am not the last after all. The human fleet filled the sky. Stood on the observation deck of the flagship Remembrance, watching the Dominion's warships turn away. They did not flee exactly. They simply decided that fighting was no longer wise. 1,000 human vessels had arrived, each one larger and more advanced than anything they had ever built. War would have been suicide. Had sent a message of surrender before the first human ship came within weapons range. Now, hours later, found himself surrounded by beings he had been taught to worship. They were shorter than, with soft skin in many different colors. They had no claws, no armored plates, no natural weapons of any kind. They looked fragile, breakable, weak. But they had crossed the darkness between galaxies. They had built civilizations on 1,000 worlds. They had survived for 12,000 years and grown strong. And when they had heard broadcast, they had come. The admiral was a woman named, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had wept openly when was brought aboard, falling to her knees and pressing her forehead to the floor in a gesture of respect that seemed to surprise even the other humans. We thought you were all dead, said, her voice breaking. The archives, the language keepers. We searched for 8,000 years. We found the wrecks of other ships, the bodies of other archives, but never a survivor, never someone who could teach us what we had lost. Was sitting in a chair that seemed too large for her. She was wrapped in blankets, surrounded by doctors who kept checking her vital signs. She looked exhausted, drained, empty, but she was smiling. I am only one, she said. I carry only my family of languages. There were 52 others. Their languages are truly gone now. But yours are not, reached out and took's hand. 847 tongues, living languages, dead languages, languages that we had forgotten even existed. You are the greatest treasure humanity has ever found. You are priceless. Shook her head. I am not a treasure, I am a voice. That is all I ever wanted to be. She looked at, who was standing awkwardly near the wall, trying not to attract attention. "And this one helped me," she said. "He was willing to die for the truth. He deserves to be part of whatever comes next." Studied the priest for a long moment, then she nodded. "We have heard what your people did," she said to him. "Thousands of years ago, they found a human expedition. They took our words and built a religion around them. What they could not understand." Bowed his head. "We did not know, we could not have known." "No," agreed. "You could not. And in a way, you preserved something valuable. You kept those words alive even if you did not understand them. There is honor in that." She stood up. "The Dominion has committed crimes. They tried to kill a linguistic archive. They threatened war to protect their lies. There must be consequences." Felt fear rise in his chest. "Please. My people are not evil, they were afraid. They did not want to lose everything they believed in." "I understand fear," said. "Humanity knows fear very well. We feared the darkness between stars. We feared that we would forget who we were. We feared silence." She smiled, and it was not a cruel smile. "But we also learned that fear is a poor foundation for civilization. Truth is better, even painful truth, even truth that destroys what came before." She turned to, "What do you want? You are the one they hurt. You are the one who suffered. What would you ask of us?" Thought for a long moment. The room was silent, waiting. "In the old days on Earth," she finally said, "when one people wronged another, there was a tradition. First came acknowledgement. The wrongdoer had to admit what they had done. Then came return. What was stolen had to be given back." She looked at, "Your people built their world on stolen words. You took fragments of human culture and made them into something you could not understand. Now those words have come home, but they do not need to be taken away. They can be shared." She stood up slowly, pushing away the doctors who tried to stop her. "Let me teach," she said. "Let me speak to your people and human alike. Let me show them what these words truly mean. Let the languages that were stolen become bridges instead of walls." Admiral nodded. "It will be done." And so it was. The negotiations took many months, and the old council were removed from power, replaced by younger leaders who were willing to face the truth. The path of the first voice did not disappear, but it changed. It became a religion of learning, of understanding, of reaching across the darkness to touch other minds. Became the most famous being in known space. She traveled from world to world, human and speaking in tongues that had been silent for. She taught children to count in languages that had been spoken before the pyramids were built. She sang love songs in words that had never been written down, preserved only in the minds of people long dead. And always, everywhere she went, people listened. On the day of the great gathering, the largest crowd ever assembled came together on Prime. Millions of beings, human and alien, stood side by side in the ancient plaza where the forbidden codex had once been read aloud by priests who did not understand a word. Stood before them. She was healthier now, stronger. The doctors had done their work well, but there was still something fragile about her, something that reminded everyone who saw her of how close they had come to losing her forever. She began to speak. It was not a prayer. It was not a speech. It was a nursery rhyme, a simple song about animals and colors and the joy of being alive. It had been sung by human mothers to their children for 12,000 years, passed down from generation to generation, changing slightly with each telling but always keeping its heart. Had learned it from her grandmother, who had learned it from hers, stretching back into a past so deep that no one knew where it began. The children in the crowd began to repeat the words. Human children and children, side by side, learning sounds that their ancestors had never known. The language spread through the plaza like ripples in still water. By the end of the song, millions of voices were singing together. Stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. Tears ran down his gray face. He did not try to wipe them away. Admiral stood beside him. "Why are you crying?" she asked. "Because I understand now," he said. "For 200 years I read words I could not comprehend. I thought the mystery was the point. I thought that not understanding was sacred." He shook his head. "But this is better. Understanding is better. Connection is better. Knowing that those words were spoken by people who loved and laughed and feared and hoped just as we do. That is the real miracle, not mystery but meaning." He watched lead the crowd through another verse of the song. Her voice was small against the roar of millions, but somehow it still carried. "This is why they survived," he said, more to himself than to. "Not because they conquered, not because they were strong, but because they remembered, because they refused to let their words die even when everything else was lost." Nodded, she had seen many things in her long career, wars and victories and defeats, but she had never seen anything quite like this. An entire civilization learning to speak with the voice of another. Bridges being built across a gap of 12,000 years. "We have a saying," she said, "from a very old book that most people have forgotten. It says, 'In the beginning was the Word.'" She smiled. "I never really understood what it meant until now." Across the plaza finished the nursery rhyme. The crowd fell silent, waiting. She looked out at them, at the millions of faces watching her, at the future that had seemed impossible only months ago. Then she began to tell them a story. An old story from a language that had been dead for 15,000 years. A story about a small child who looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. The child had never found out. The child had grown old and died in a time before writing, before history, before memory. But the story had survived, passed from parent to child, across countless generations, across the death of languages and the rise and fall of civilizations. And now it was being told again, after all this time, in a plaza on an alien world to an audience of millions. The child's question had finally been answered. And in the silence between stars, somewhere in the vast darkness, like to imagine that the spirits of all those who had spoken before her were listening. All the poets and priests and mothers and children. All the voices that had trusted her to keep them alive. She spoke for them now, and through her they spoke again. The silence had finally ended. The words lived on.